The LED lights above the boardroom buzzed softly, their cold white glare reflecting off the polished table like a line of tiny fluorescent rivers. I could feel the subtle vibration of the air conditioner, a low hum that seemed to echo the tension threading through the room. Each hum, each flicker of light, each soft scrape of a chair on the tile felt amplified under my skin. I set my pen down with deliberate care, my fingers lingering on the metal barrel for just a moment longer than necessary, as if drawing strength from its weight. Shoulders square, back straight. I sat with the kind of posture that silently said, "I am here, and I am ready." The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and sanitizer, a sterile, corporate aroma that mingled with the faint warmth of human anxiety. Around me, microaggressions floated almost invisibly. A small sigh from one colleague, barely audible but sharp enough to pierce the calm. A subtle smirk from another, the kind of expression that implied doubt before a single word was spoken. And there was the usual side-eye glances, the tiny tilts of the head that suggested, "Really? She's leading this meeting?" It's the kind of tension that Black women learn to carry almost instinctively, a weight placed gently but insistently upon our shoulders, as though we are always under a microscope. I inhaled slowly, filling my lungs, holding the breath for a beat, then releasing it just as deliberately. Each exhale pushed the tension outward, letting calm seep inward. My quiet power isn't loud, it's measured, slow, deliberate. It's in the tilt of my chin, the way I rest my palms lightly on the table, the steadiness of my gaze as I track each micro-expression across the room. I noticed how the projector light caught the dust motes in the air, how the shadows from the chairs stretched long across the tile, how the faint reflection of my colleagues' faces shimmered on the table surface. Everything is noticed. Every detail counts. My eyes flicked to the notes in front of me. The page was blank for now, but my mind had already begun organizing, time-stamping, mentally logging every potential point of discussion. I had rehearsed, not for confrontation, but for readiness. Quiet power, I reminded myself, lives in preparation. I could feel it settling into my shoulders, a slow heat of control that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. Around me, the room was alive with tension, the low hum of anticipation, the shuffle of papers, the slight click of a pen being clicked open and closed more than necessary. I glanced briefly at my colleagues' hands, noting who tapped fingers against notebooks, who fidgeted with rings or bracelets. Every small gesture told a story. Unease, skepticism, mild impatience, curiosity. I tracked their eyes as they flickered from laptop screens to phones to me. Some faces betrayed impatience, others quiet judgment, and a few carried polite masks that barely concealed incredulity. It's always there, the subtle questioning of competence that a Black woman navigates daily in corporate America. And I carried it not as a burden, but as a reminder. The room underestimates me at their peril. The clock ticked softly, a background percussion that marked the seconds stretching long before any words had been spoken. I focused on the way light caught the edge of my laptop screen, the silvered reflection of my hands poised over the keyboard. I noticed the faint scratches on the polished tabletop, each one a memory, a small imperfection mirroring the subtle tensions around us. The AC hummed again, a reminder that time moves, even when anticipation makes it feel as if it stands still. I breathed in again, deliberately, filling the space with my presence without speaking a single word. My posture, my gaze, the stillness of my hands, each element was a signal, quiet but firm. I am centered. I am disciplined. I am ready for the storm. Around me, the flickers of doubt, the micro shifts of body language, the tiny clicks of pens, they all contributed to the symphony of tension. But they did not unseat me. They did not disturb the quiet power I carried like a shield. And in that quiet, deliberate stillness, I felt it. Anticipation, like a held breath in the chest of the room. The first words haven't been spoken, but the storm was approaching. I could sense the subtle shifts in energy, the pressure gathering, the way light and shadow played against polished surfaces and anxious faces. It was the familiar weight of being watched, measured, judged, but also the familiar thrill of knowing that I was prepared. Fully, meticulously prepared. Every glance around the table, every faint murmur, every tap or scratch was catalogued in my mind, ready to be translated into action when necessary. I let the calm deepen, the quiet power sink further into my bones, until it became almost tangible, a presence that radiated outwards, slow but undeniable. And in that moment, I knew that when the accusation came, as it inevitably would, it would meet not fear, not defensiveness, but precision, preparation, and the kind of quiet strength that is impossible to argue with. The LED lights flickered softly once, a tiny pulse of illumination, catching the glint of my pen, my laptop, the faint sheen of sweat on the polished table. The air conditioner rattled again. Everything in the room, the light, the sound, the micro-movements of my colleagues was now part of the stage. And I sat, quiet, still, commanding attention without a word, ready for the storm to arrive. The moment arrived without fanfare, but it hit like a sudden chill. He leaned forward, fingers gripping the edge of the polished table, and with a sharp motion pushed the contract toward me. The paper slid across the surface. A subtle but deliberate accusation in motion. "You signed off on it," he said, voice flat, cutting through the soft hum of the AC like a scalpel. Chairs scraped lightly against the tile. Pens clicked. Colleagues shifted in their seats, eyes darting between us, some widening slightly, some feigning casual glances elsewhere. The room was suddenly charged with tension, every subtle movement magnified in the quiet that followed his words. I could feel it, the familiar pang, the old sting that Black women in corporate America know all too well, being blamed for decisions made collectively, or even for errors that weren't yours. I didn't react immediately. I didn't flinch, didn't inhale sharply, didn't tighten my jaw. Instead, I let the words hang in the air, suspended, almost tasting the subtle anticipation that trembled in the room. Microexpressions danced across my colleagues' faces. Surprise, skepticism, the almost imperceptible smirk of someone thinking, well, there it is. The accusation had landed perfectly in the way it was intended, sharp, precise, and designed to destabilize me. I rested my fingertips lightly on my laptop, feeling the smooth aluminum cool under my touch. My other hand remained relaxed on the table. My back stayed straight, my shoulders squared. I breathed slowly, deliberately, a metronome of calm in the midst of mounting tension. I watched him, noting the tilt of his head, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way he expected some kind of flustered reaction. He was waiting for the crack, the hesitation. Around the room, the subtle chorus of microaggressions continued, now louder in the charged silence. A faint cough, a rustle of papers, a half-smile that didn't reach the eyes. My colleagues' body language told me what they thought. Doubt, judgment, curiosity. Every flick of the wrist, every tap of a pen, every shifting foot became a rhythm I catalogued silently, a prelude to the storm I had anticipated. I could feel the familiar pressure in my chest, that quiet heat that rises when someone assumes guilt without proof. But it didn't shake me. It didn't move me. Instead, I let it settle, let it sharpen my focus. My mind traced the sequence of meetings, decisions, approvals, timestamps, all documented meticulously, all recorded in the file I had prepared for this exact scenario. The power of preparation, I reminded myself, is quiet but unassailable. The hum of the AC, the subtle creak of chairs, the faint tapping of pens, all of it became a soundtrack to my calm. I made eye contact with no one, letting the accusation float into the room without giving it a foothold in my posture, my voice, or my expression. My quiet strength radiated outward, subtle, but undeniable. And in that suspended moment, I felt it. The first stab of accusation, precise and sharp, had landed, but it had not pierced me. Not because of bravado, not because of anger, but because I had anticipated this moment down to the last detail. I had prepared, I had evidence, I had control. The room didn't realize it yet, but the scales were about to shift. The tension hung thick in the air, a living thing, palpable, almost tactile. Every eye in the room was subtly drawn to me, waiting, measuring, expecting a reaction. But I remained still, calm, collected. Quiet power isn't loud, it's deliberate. And in that moment, with the accusation in the air, I felt the weight of it transform into something else. The anticipation of the reversal I had been preparing for. The moment when fact would speak, louder than assumption. Be honest. What would you do if it was you sitting in that room? Drop your thoughts below. I want to hear you. I let the accusation hover in the air for a beat, longer than necessary. The faint hum of the AC seemed louder now, every small noise amplified in the taut stillness of the room. Colleagues shifted again, some leaning slightly forward, some trying to appear casual while stealing glances at me. The paper contract remained in front of me, a symbol of supposed guilt, but I did not reach for it. My fingers hovered lightly over the laptop, the device I had prepared for this exact scenario, the instrument that would turn assumption into undeniable fact. I opened the file labeled Meeting Notes and let the glow of the screen illuminate my face. The screen reflected faintly on the polished table, casting a subtle halo that seemed to signal readiness without a word. Each section of the document was precise, deliberate. A subject line that mirrored the official meeting header, timestamps that recorded every moment, bullet points that traced the flow of conversation, and direct quotes from him, word for word, frozen in time. Every line carried weight. Every detail mattered. I took a breath and scrolled slowly, deliberately, revealing the first screenshot of the whiteboard. The captured image showed who had made each decision, the arrows and annotations still clear and sharp. My colleagues leaned in, drawn subconsciously to the clarity of what they saw, though none yet realized the depth of my preparation. The room's energy shifted imperceptibly, like the faint current of wind before a storm breaks. I kept my expression neutral, letting the evidence speak without commentary. The micro details were everything. The way my fingertips hovered above the keyboard, the subtle pause before scrolling to the next timestamp, the calm steadiness of my gaze as I met no one's eyes directly. All of it was deliberate. Quiet power thrives in control, in measured action, in the precision of prepared evidence. The notes were 5 times stronger than memory alone, 5 times more persuasive than any argument I could have voiced in panic. And in this room, full of subtle judgment and unspoken skepticism, that strength was about to become undeniable. I scrolled down to the meeting from last Thursday, the session where the critical approval had been discussed. The timestamps marked the exact moment he had spoken, the bullet points captured the sequence of decisions, and the quotes, each carefully typed, reflected the tone, the words, the intent. He had said, "We should move forward with this as outlined," and now his own words glowed on my screen like a mirror. No one could dispute them. No one could spin them. I could feel the collective attention of the room tighten, drawn to the screen without their conscious realization. Every micro gesture, fidgeting fingers, slight shifts in posture, subtle inhalations told me the evidence had begun to land. The AC's hum, the distant ticking of a clock, even the faint squeak of a chair leg became part of a cinematic rhythm, a soundtrack to the revelation about to unfold. I did not speak. I let the notes breathe. Each timestamp, bullet, and screenshot an unspoken argument. Scrolling further, I revealed the annotated decisions, lines connecting names to actions, showing clearly who had approved what. Every arrow, every highlight, every tiny annotation had been meticulously prepared. My heart remained steady, my breath even, though inside there was a quiet surge of vindication. The room, full of corporate tension and unspoken assumptions, was now confronted with something they could not deny. I lingered on one particular section, a subtle smile touching my lips internally, though my face remained neutral. Here was the moment where the supposed blame had originated a misinterpretation that, without documentation, could have been laid at my feet. But now it was all captured, frozen, irrefutable. My colleague's eyes flickered across the screen, reading, calculating, digesting, and though no one spoke, I could feel the weight of perception beginning to shift. The glow of the laptop reflected in their eyes as they leaned in, and in that reflection I could see the faint dawning of recognition, an awareness that I had anticipated this moment, that preparation had outpaced accusation. My quiet power was no longer hypothetical. It was present, tangible, anchored in fact, and visible for anyone who chose to see. The room's rhythm, previously chaotic and expectant, had slowed into a tense, measured beat, each second counting as the truth unfolded before them. I scrolled once more, highlighting the final pieces, the exact timestamps, the quotes, the whiteboard snapshots, and the succinct bullet points that tied it all together. Each element reinforced the others, a five-fold amplification of my preparation. Every colleague who glanced at the screen was now facing the reality. Assumptions alone carry no weight when confronted with precise, deliberate, documented truth. My calm, meticulous presentation transformed accusation into clarity, doubt into recognition, and tension into an almost cinematic stillness. And in that stillness, I knew. The first round had been survived. The evidence was laid bare. The room could no longer operate on speculation or bias. The notes had spoken, quietly but decisively. I closed my fingers lightly over the edge of the laptop, ready for the next step, ready for the moment when fact would confront assumption head-on. Quiet power, measured preparation, and meticulous documentation, the three pillars that would turn this accusation into my advantage, had done their work. You won't believe what happens next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. I paused for a long beat, letting the room absorb the glow of the laptop screen. Every eye was drawn to it now, though no one had yet noticed the depth of preparation behind the cursor and lines of text. My fingers hovered lightly over the keyboard, a poised conductor ready to orchestrate a silent symphony. I did not rush. I did not flinch. Quiet power, I reminded myself, is deliberate. It is the stillness that precedes the strike. Slowly, deliberately, I swiveled the laptop screen toward the center of the table. The soft glow caught in the polished surface, reflecting in the eyes of my colleagues, pulling them into the narrative I had built silently, meticulously. The AC hummed, a steady background note to the rhythm I was creating. Chairs creaked softly as people leaned in, drawn not by words but by the undeniable presence of irrefutable evidence. Every timestamp, every bullet point, every whiteboard screenshot had been laid out like pieces in a chess game, each ready to support the next move. I traced a line with my fingertip across the first set of timestamps. My gesture was small, controlled, almost imperceptible, yet precise. Each movement was a signal. I was guiding attention, not dictating it. My posture remained calm, shoulders squared, back straight, breathing measured, deliberate. I let the room's tension ebb and flow with my movements. Micro-gestures became tools of influence. A tilt of the wrist, a pause before scrolling, a slow glance toward the faces around me. They were reading me, analyzing, calculating, and unknowingly falling into the rhythm I had established. The first direct quote from him gleamed on the screen. I lingered, letting it resonate, while my eyes scanned the subtle shifts in body language around the table. One colleague's fingers tapped nervously on a notebook. Another's eyes widened, a half-muttered breath betraying surprise. The hum of the projector flickered lightly, catching in the reflection of the laptop, adding cinematic depth to the moment. I did not speak. My notes, my preparation, my calm, the evidence itself became the voice of authority. I pointed ever so slightly at the first screenshot of the whiteboard, tracing the arrows connecting names to decisions. The subtle movement drew attention, a gentle guide through the story laid bare. The room was silent, but for the tiny ambient sounds, chairs shifting, pens tapping, breaths held and released. Every detail, the reflection of light on polished surfaces, the hum of the AC, the faint scratch of a chair leg worked in concert to heighten the tension, cinematic and deliberate. 5 times stronger than memory alone, my documentation now carried a presence, a gravity that no accusation could outweigh. I scrolled down slowly, revealing a chain of bullet points outlining each decision made, each step recorded with meticulous care. The dates and timestamps made the narrative undeniable. My colleagues could read them, trace the decisions, see clearly who said what, who approved what, and when. The moment was not loud. There were no raised voices, no dramatic flourishes. It was quiet, calculated, precise, and in that quiet, my authority was absolute. I paused again, breathing in slowly, letting my presence settle over the table like a low tide. Every subtle adjustment, the tilt of my head, the calm steadiness of my hands, the soft tap of a fingertip reinforced the rhythm of control. Each micro-movement communicated preparation, discipline, and strength. The room's energy shifted subtly, uncertainty mingled with recognition. No one could argue with documented fact. No one could dispute meticulously recorded truth. The AC's hum, the faint ticking of a clock on the wall, the soft rustle of paper all became a backdrop for the crescendo that was building silently. I highlighted a key timestamp, the point where a decision had been misattributed. My finger traced the line gently, drawing attention, guiding perception without a word. I watched as shoulders tensed, as pens paused mid-click, as eyes followed the evidence on the screen with a mix of surprise and calculation. My calm, my focus, my quiet authority had transformed the room from charged tension to attentive engagement. I moved to the next quote, a direct line from him that contradicted the accusation. Slowly, deliberately, I highlighted it, letting the glow of the screen draw every eye. Each micro-gesture, the slight lift of my chin, the subtle movement of my wrist, the controlled pacing of my breath amplified the impact. The room leaned in collectively, absorbed, almost hypnotized by the clarity of what they were seeing. The evidence wasn't just displayed, it commanded attention, subtle but undeniable. I scrolled to the next whiteboard screenshot, the lines connecting decisions and responsibilities now crystal clear. The arrows, the names, the annotations all told the story with visual authority. I let my finger rest lightly on the screen, pausing just long enough for them to follow the narrative. This was my choreography, quiet and deliberate. Every small motion, every pause, every breath was part of a larger rhythm, a strategic unfolding of undeniable truth. Time seemed to stretch, elongated by the deliberate pace of revelation. I could feel the anticipation, the subtle recalculation occurring around the table. Each colleague processed the facts differently: surprise, disbelief, reluctant recognition. And through it all, I remained a calm, steady presence, a silent conductor, orchestrating a truth that could not be argued away. My quiet power, my preparation, my meticulous documentation, each element had built to this moment, 5 times stronger than any defensive argument could ever be. And finally, I exhaled slowly, letting the subtle pressure in the room settle into a tense, measured calm. The strategy was complete. No words had been raised, no confrontations initiated. The evidence itself, highlighted, organized, and revealed with deliberate care, had shifted perception. I closed my hand over the trackpad lightly, letting the last glow of the laptop fade slightly, signaling the end of this movement in the symphony of quiet authority. The storm had not yet passed, but the tide had shifted irrevocably in my favor. If you've ever been overlooked or underpaid, this part's for you, and if you feel that, hit that. The room was quiet. Too quiet. The hum of the AC seemed louder now. A subtle vibration under every foot, every chair, every breath. I held my gaze on the laptop screen, the glow illuminating my face softly, reflecting in my eyes like a signal of controlled authority. Every colleague leaned in, almost without realizing, drawn into the clarity that had been laid bare before them. This was the moment when perception would bend to truth, when assumption would meet irrefutable fact. I scrolled slowly to the next set of timestamps, letting the movement feel deliberate, almost ceremonial. Each line, each bullet point, each whiteboard screenshot was a piece of the puzzle, 5 times more precise than memory alone could ever be. I traced one arrow with a fingertip, guiding attention, highlighting the moment when decisions had truly been made, when responsibility had been correctly assigned. Their eyes followed, some widening, some narrowing, as comprehension began to flicker across faces. Then I hovered over the direct quote, his exact words frozen in text. I let it linger, unspoken, a mirror held up to the accusation. We should move forward as outlined. The words had weight now, tangible, undeniable, and they struck the room like a silent hammer. Eyes flicked up, glanced at me, then back at the screen, a flicker of disbelief passing across several faces. He shifted slightly, unease creeping into posture that had been rigid only moments before. The air was electric, thick with recognition, the subtle tremor of accountability beginning to ripple. I allowed the silence to stretch, every second heavy with anticipation. The subtle rustle of papers, the faint tapping of pens, the soft creak of chairs, all amplified, all part of the cinematic rhythm unfolding. My shoulders remained squared, my breathing slow and deliberate. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Each micro gesture, the tilt of my chin, the slight lift of a wrist, the measured pace of my scrolling communicated control. The room was listening to evidence. The room was learning the power of preparation. He leaned in, eyes scanning the quotes, timestamps, and whiteboard screenshots. Recognition struck first as a flash, a subtle tightening in the jaw, a faint shift backward in the chair. His own words now stared him in the face, 5 times more potent than the verbal accusation he had launched. The realization that he had been caught in his own directives, a quiet but undeniable reversal, settled over the table like a wave. Every colleague sensed it. Every micro-expression betrayed it. Silence wasn't empty anymore. It was charged. I let my gaze sweep slowly across the room, catching fleeting glances. Surprise, shock, reluctant respect. No one dared speak, not yet. The glow from the laptop reflected on polished surfaces, glinting in their eyes, marking the moment in a subtle, cinematic way. My fingers rested lightly on the trackpad, poised but unmoving. Quiet power, I reminded myself, was in restraint, in the deliberate unfolding of truth. The evidence had done its work. I was merely the steward of it. A colleague swallowed audibly. Another's fingers stilled over a notebook, pen frozen mid-tap. Even the slight shuffle of the person across the table felt like movement in slow motion, magnified by the intensity of the moment. Every subtle reaction reinforced what was happening. The accusation had crumbled, not by confrontation, not by anger, but by meticulous preparation, by quiet, undeniable clarity. 5 times stronger than any verbal rebuttal, the documentation spoke for itself. The AC hummed again, faint but persistent, a steady underscore to the silent climax unfolding. I exhaled slowly, the exhale measured, grounding myself even as adrenaline flickered beneath my skin. The reversal was complete. The tide shifted, and the room was acutely aware of it. Tension lingered, thick and almost tactile, but it was now charged with recognition, awe, and subtle unease. They had watched a quiet triumph unfold, a strategy executed with precision, without spectacle, without drama. And in that cinematic pause, I allowed a subtle internal acknowledgement of victory. Not loud, not boastful, just quiet, internal satisfaction. The laptop screen glowed softly, the timestamps, bullet points, and whiteboard snapshots standing as proof. Every micro gesture, every ounce of calm, every second of preparation had created this reversal, this moment of undeniable truth, 5 times stronger than memory, 5 times more powerful than accusation. And it was mine. Unspoken, undeniable, absolute. The silence hung thick, heavy like velvet, stretching over the polished boardroom table. The hum of the AC, which had once been background white noise, now sounded amplified, almost as if it were holding its breath along with everyone else. I kept my gaze fixed on the laptop screen, the glow soft but insistent, reflecting subtly in my eyes and on the polished wood surface in front of me. Every colleague leaned in, unconsciously drawn to the clarity of what was displayed, yet none dared break the spell. The room was caught in a delicate balance, tension poised on the edge of recognition, the first ripples of justice spreading through the air like a quiet storm. He exhaled slowly, almost audibly, the rigid posture that had accompanied his initial accusation beginning to slacken. His fingers twitched briefly on the table, then retreated, a subconscious acknowledgement of defeat. "We'll need to review this again," he said carefully, each word measured, cautious, deliberate. There was no triumph in his voice, no arrogance, only a subtle, reluctant concession to the evidence that could no longer be denied. The shift was almost imperceptible, yet monumental. Power, once assumed, was quietly migrating across the room. I let the words settle in the air, unbroken by my own response. I didn't nod immediately. I didn't speak. I remained a calm presence, letting the weight of my preparation and documentation do the talking. My shoulders were squared, my back straight, my hands resting lightly on the laptop. Every micro gesture carried authority. The slow, deliberate blink of an eye, the measured inhale, the subtle lift of my chin. Quiet power thrives in restraint, in letting truth be its own advocate. Across the table, colleagues avoided my gaze. Their eyes flicked downward, some scanning papers nervously, others adjusting their chairs, a few pressing lips together as if to hold back thoughts better left unsaid. The energy in the room had shifted subtly, but decisively. Where once accusation had ruled, now recognition ruled. Where doubt had lingered, respect, and perhaps a bit of fear had begun to take root. The air vibrated with this silent exchange, the micro-shifts of posture and breath translating a narrative more powerful than words. Marron got 6. I allowed the silence to deepen, to stretch, to settle into every corner of that room. It was the kind of silence that didn't demand attention, it commanded it. The kind that made people shift in their seats, glance at one another, and suddenly become hyper-aware of their own breathing. I didn't rush to fill it. I didn't soften it. I let it exist. Let it expand. Let it remind everyone that the power had moved. The stillness around me wasn't empty. It was intentional, curated, and anchored in the work I had done long before this meeting ever began. My posture remained a still frame, shoulders firm, spine lengthened, chin lifted just enough to signal presence without a hint of arrogance. My hands stayed poised on the laptop, fingers relaxed, not gripping, not tapping. Stillness can be louder than any argument. Stillness, when held with confidence, becomes a language of its own. And in that moment, my body was fluent. I blinked once, slowly. A deliberate, controlled gesture that punctuated the moment like a subtle endmark to a sentence. The rise and fall of my breath was measured, unhurried, almost meditative. Quiet power isn't reactive. It's paced. It knows the value of pausing, of inhabiting a moment fully before the next move is made. I embodied that power, letting it radiate through every calm breath, every steady gaze, every ounce of restraint. Across the table, the shift was palpable. People who'd been all too comfortable watching me absorb blame only minutes earlier now found themselves unsettled, their confidence faltering under the weight of what they had just witnessed. One colleague pretended to straighten papers that didn't need straightening, her hands trembling slightly at the edges. Another leaned back in his chair too quickly, catching himself before the motion became obvious. A few stared fixedly at their notepads, unwilling to meet my eyes, as though eye contact might force them to confront something they weren't ready to acknowledge. The air thickened with the quiet recognition that the narrative had turned. Doubt, once easy, almost reflexive, dissolved into something sharper. People sat straighter but not taller. Their bodies betrayed them. Tightened shoulders, clenched jaws, fingers tapping nervously on closed laptops. Respect edged its way into the room, subtle and quiet but unmistakably present. And beneath that respect, I sensed something else simmering: fear. Not fear of me, but fear of what my preparation represented. Fear of how easily the truth can flip a room when the one holding it refuses to be shaken. I watched these small shifts, tiny adjustments in posture, the faint clearing of a throat, the way someone exhaled too fast and then tried to mask it. Micro gestures reveal what words hide, and the story unfolding in front of me was unmistakable. They understood. They understood they had misjudged the moment, misread the dynamic, underestimated the person they thought would fold. They understood the receipts were unarguable, the evidence airtight, the truth undeniable. The silence became its own form of justice, its own kind of statement. It circled the room like a slow, deliberate tide, reshaping everything it touched. No one dared break it, because breaking it meant acknowledging what had just happened, and none of them were ready to speak that truth out loud. Not yet. The only sound was the low hum of the AC and the faint rustling of someone shifting their weight, uncomfortable in a chair that had felt perfectly fine minutes before. I didn't rescue them from the discomfort. I didn't offer a reassuring smile or a softening gesture. That would have been a kindness earned, not given. Instead, I let the atmosphere sit heavily, let each person in the room feel the consequence of their assumptions, their silence, their misreadings. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't retaliation. This was justice, quiet, sharpened, and fully realized. And as I breathed in again, slow and steady, I felt the moment crystallize. The power dynamic had been rewritten in real time, not by volume, not by ego, but by truth. And the truth, grounded in preparation and documentation, had done exactly what it was designed to do: shift the room, without a single word spoken from my mouth. I traced a finger lightly along the edge of the laptop screen, not to point, but to anchor myself in the moment. Each line of evidence, the timestamps, bullet points, direct quotes, and whiteboard screenshots worked like a series of dominoes, toppling assumptions and revealing clarity. The room's energy was taut, electric, and cinematic. Shadows from the overhead LED lights stretched across polished surfaces, flickering subtly as colleagues shifted, caught in the moment between tension and acceptance. I could feel the adrenaline in my veins, the quiet heat of triumph rising, but I maintained measured calm. My inner voice whispered, "This is why preparation is power." Each micro detail, each precise record, each annotation I had documented months ago had converged to create this moment. My quiet revenge wasn't vengeance. It was justice. Smart, controlled, unshakable. And now, it was being felt by everyone in the room, reverberating through posture, breath, and subtle glance. He straightened slightly, the first hint of surrender visible in his eyes. Recognition flickered there, fleeting but undeniable. A colleague cleared their throat quietly, a small acknowledgement that the evidence was irrefutable, a subtle bow to the shift in authority. The AC hummed again, softly, almost reverently, punctuating the room's collective realization. Time seemed to stretch, elongated by the deliberate pacing of this reversal, every second amplifying the weight of consequence. I allowed a slow scan of the room, taking in each face without judgment, without malice. Surprise, restrained awe, and a tentative respect nuances that only subtle observation could reveal. Microexpressions flickered briefly, telling the story the words could not. Acknowledgement of preparation, of intelligence, of quiet mastery. Each colleague had witnessed the proof, and each now carried a trace of the shift. The room's dynamic had been irreversibly altered. 5 times stronger than accusation alone, my documentation had redefined perception. The air itself seemed denser, charged with the invisible current of justice. I noticed the faint reflection of light on the table, caught in a scratch that had gone unnoticed before, glinting like a silent witness to the scene unfolding. Fingers tapped nervously on notebooks. The faint shuffling of chairs punctuated the rhythm of anticipation. Even the soft hum of the projector flickered, as if acknowledging the magnitude of what had occurred. In this cinematic pause, the world had narrowed to the glow of the laptop and the undeniable shift in power across the room. I exhaled slowly, letting the subtle heat of victory settle into my bones. My shoulders relaxed fractionally, though my posture remained deliberate. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand acknowledgement. I simply sat, letting the rhythm of calm, control, and undeniable evidence complete its work. The room had changed, subtle, silent, irreversible. Power no longer resided solely in the one who had accused. It had moved. Quiet, precise, smart, and indelible. And in that moment, I understood fully. Justice is not always loud. It doesn't need applause. It arrives in preparation, in meticulous documentation, in the quiet confidence that comes from being unshakably ready. I allowed a single small nod, internal acknowledgement to myself. The storm had passed. The accusation had been met, reversed, and neutralized. My authority, grounded in truth, had asserted itself without spectacle, without drama, but with undeniable force. The room remained silent, thick with recognition and reflection. Every subtle glance, every small movement, every micro-expression was a testament to the shift that had occurred. They had seen what meticulous preparation could do. They had felt the quiet but unyielding power of evidence. And I had orchestrated it all without raising my voice, without showing anger, without resorting to anything but discipline, foresight, and calm. I closed my eyes for a brief, imperceptible moment, letting the victory wash over me silently. Then I opened them, steady, composed, letting the room carry its awareness without my comment. 5 times stronger than accusation, 5 times more powerful than doubt, quiet, deliberate, undeniable, and entirely mine. The hallway lights dimmed behind me as the boardroom door clicked shut, but the energy of that room, the tension, the reckoning, the quiet shift of power still pulsed through my body like a low electric current. I walked slowly, letting each step settle the storm that had just unfolded. The weight I carried wasn't exhaustion, it was clarity. It was the unmistakable resonance of justice, delivered not through anger or confrontation, but through preparation, discipline, and self-protection. As I reached my desk, the faint hum of office chatter drifted through the air, phones ringing, a copier grinding out page after page, heels clicking on polished floors. Life had already moved on for others, but inside me, something had recalibrated. I sat down, resting my fingers on the cool metal of my laptop. For a moment, I simply breathed, letting the stillness settle around me. Quiet victories require space to land. They occupy a different place in the soul. They don't explode, they hum. For so many Black professionals, especially Black women, justice is rarely a spectacle. It doesn't arrive with applause or overt recognition. Often, it's a quiet moment of truth, earned through resilience and foresight. That was today. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply, powerfully real. And I knew that what I had experienced wasn't just a personal win. It was a blueprint, a lived reminder of an unspoken rule. We cannot rely solely on memory in spaces built to question our presence. We rely on receipts, on documentation, on evidence so clean no bias can distort it. I opened my journal, the one I kept tucked away in my bottom drawer, pages worn from late-night reflections. The pen glided across the paper as thoughts poured through me, not rushed but intentional. I wrote about the expectation to be twice as prepared, twice as meticulous, twice as composed. I wrote about how often we walk into rooms where our expertise is treated as optional, our professionalism scrutinized under microscopes others never face. And yet, we show up. We excel. We document. The truth is, documentation is not paranoia, it is protection, a form of self-advocacy, a quiet declaration that says, "You will not rewrite this narrative." For Black professionals, especially those of us navigating predominantly white corporate spaces, this isn't cynicism, it's strategy, it's survival, it's wisdom passed down in Slack messages, whispered in bathroom mirrors, texted after meetings that left us breathless from holding too much. As I wrote, I remembered the way my colleagues had avoided my eyes after the reversal, some out of discomfort, some out of respect, some out of a dawning awareness that the assumptions they had carried were flawed. Those micro-shifts mattered, not because I needed their approval, but because moments like this crack something open. They reveal who pays attention to truth, who clings to bias, and who learns. Justice doesn't always look like accountability spoken aloud. Sometimes it looks like a room forced into silence, faced with undeniable evidence. My screensaver flickered on, reflecting a soft glow across my hands. I turned the laptop back toward myself, replaying in my mind how each detail, from the time-stamped notes to the screenshot of the whiteboard, had worked like a chorus, each voice amplifying the next. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was the power of being prepared in a system that frequently tries to catch us unprepared. I leaned back in my chair, letting the leather embrace my shoulders as I absorbed the heaviness and the beauty of the moment. For a long, quiet stretch of time, I simply existed in that space, thinking not only of myself, but of every Black professional who carries the invisible weight of doubt, of every meeting where our competence is quietly questioned, of every email where our tone is dissected, of every moment where we must decide whether to speak, document, or both. And then, slowly, I felt the lesson crystallize. Not abstract, not philosophical, but grounded, practical, and deeply human. Preparation is a form of power. Documentation is a form of truth-telling. Evidence is a form of self-defense. It's not fair that we need it more than others. It's not fair that our memory is not considered enough. It's not fair that we must move with both grace and proof. But fairness was never the promise. Survival was. Excellence was. And justice, the quiet kind we build ourselves, was. I thought about the younger versions of us entering their first corporate roles, full of talent but unaware of the unspoken rules. I thought about the mid-career Black professionals tired of carrying the extra weight. I thought about the elders who had been documenting before. Documentation was even a formal practice. Keeping notes in handbags, writing down quotes in planners, building archives of truth no one could twist. For them, for all of us, I wrote one final line in my journal, pressing the pen down with intention. My memory is strong. My documentation is stronger. Not a catchphrase, a survival strategy, a declaration, a lesson earned. As I closed the journal, the weight in my chest didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt rooted, steady, grounded. Justice had not been loud, but it had been real. And that, to me, was enough. I gathered my things, rising from my chair with the quiet confidence that comes after a battle fought and won, not by force, but by preparation. The hallway lights cast long reflections along the floor, illuminating my path as I walked toward the elevator. The office behind me buzzed on, unchanged to most, but I knew the truth. The dynamic had shifted. The room had witnessed what happens when a Black woman comes not only with memory, but with meticulous, undeniable documentation. And as the elevator doors slid shut, I carried that truth with me, steady, unshakable, and deeply rooted, a truth I hoped others in my community would feel empowered to claim. Because the lesson was not mine alone. It belonged to all of us. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this story. If it spoke to you, hit subscribe and stay tuned for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us who we are. For every Black woman told to stay quiet, speak anyway.